Arguably regarded as the greatest fighting game ever made, Street Fighter II debuted in the arcades in 1991 and became a phenomenon around the world within mainstream media and pop culture. It was the game that single-handedly sparked the competitive fighting game revolution in the 90s, and for that reason, it's no doubt one of the most iconic video games ever made. Street Fighter II introduces a cast of 8 characters to play, with each of them having their own unique fighting style, special moves, etc. Throughout the arcade mode, you defeat 8 fighters and then move on to the Shadaloo boss characters including Balrog, Vega, Sagat, and M. Bison. After defeating M. Bison, you get an ending unique to each character. This would inspire countless other fighting games to do the same for decades to come. The game's art style, in contrast to its predecessor, the original Street Fighter, has improved drastically. The sprites are bigger, more colorful, and has smoother animation compared to the original Street Fighter. The character animation is complemented by the backgrounds that were painstakingly hand-drawn and are very detailed based on locations from around the world like USA, Japan, etc. Each stage also has its own theme song, all of which are some of the greatest video game tunes ever made. They will get stuck in your head, as I believe the sound effects mixed with the soundtrack has an addictive element to it. As I said before, there are 8 characters to pick from, which leads me to the main reason why Street Fighter II is so important. It was the first game to conjure up the idea of a competitive one-on-one fighting game. While there were other games that had almost zero skill, Street Fighter II was a learning curve, meaning you had 8 characters initially that you had to get used to / run master. Despite the game having only 8 characters initially, there were more than 8 ways of playing the game. By analyzing the matchups, you can determine the strengths and weaknesses of the fighters in said matchup. For example, Blanka has a good advantage over Zangief due to Zangief being a close-range type character and Blanka having an electric shock attack that hurts anyone who gets close to him. That's just one example, and by analyzing each of their moves, you'll be able to tell the matchups through experience. There are several versions of Street Fighter II released by Capcom, which kept the series fresh and exciting. Every year, they would release a new version, and so on. These would include Street Fighter II Champion Edition, Hyper Fighting / Turbo, Super Street Fighter II, and finally, Super Street Fighter II Turbo. Some people were annoyed by this, but Capcom knew what they were doing and only added to Street Fighter II's longevity. Everything that was great about vanilla Street Fighter II was brought back in the Champion Edition. This new version rebalances the characters, improves the graphics, and tweaked the damage. Also, they made the 4 boss characters from Shadaloo as playable characters, thus increasing the roster count to 12. And now for a piece of trivia. This version of Street Fighter II allows mirror matches, meaning that players 1 and 2 can select the same character, something you couldn't do in the original version. It was released to the Sega Genesis under the title Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition. It was originally planned to be a direct port of Champion Edition, but Sega wanted Capcom to delay the version because Street Fighter II Turbo was going to be released on the Super Nintendo, and Sega wanted their port to include Turbo's content as well. Speaking of which, next comes Street Fighter II Hyper Fighting, also known as Turbo. Following the release of the Champion Edition, unauthorized hacks of Street Fighter II began popping up in a few arcades, which sped up the gameplay and added more special moves. So in response, Capcom decided to release a new version of Street Fighter II, which would increase the speed of the gameplay to add intensity, and thus Hyper Fighting / Turbo was made. Some of the main changes from Champion Edition to Hyper Fighting include improved character designs and artwork, the ability to select one new color for each fighter, and of course, the aforementioned enhancement of the gameplay speed. It was released to the Super Nintendo under the title Street Fighter II Turbo, which was praised by critics and fans for its faithfulness to the arcade port, excluding the graphics. Next, in 1993 came Super Street Fighter 2. This version introduces 4 newcomers including Cammy, Fei Long, DJ, and T-Hawk, bringing the roster count to 16. We also have new hand-drawn stages which are England, Jamaica, Hong Kong, and Mexico, all with great theme songs. More updates were made to the game, which saw the character artwork / select screen updated, the gameplay being rebalanced, and reinvigorated sound effects. Many of the returning characters have also been given new techniques. One groundbreaking feature of Super Street Fighter 2 was the ability to select 8 colors for each character. By today's standards, it's pretty tame, but back in 1993, it was a huge deal. The player can choose either original color schemes and/or color schemes from Champion Edition and Hyper Fighting on top of the 5 brand new colors introduced in Super Street Fighter 2. The game also introduced an intuitive scoring system that kept track of combos, first attacks, reversals, and recoveries. This is where I need to mention that the combo system in Street Fighter 2 was never planned and was an accident / glitch originally that Capcom decided to keep using in future games. Crazy to think how doing combos was originally a glitch and now has since become a formula for fighting games. Anyway, the use of the in-game score system was another innovation that was never seen in a fighting game until that time. So many innovative modes were introduced in Super Street Fighter 2 alone. On top of the single / 2-player modes, a tournament battle was presented in which it acts as an 8-player single elimination tournament. This mode, however, would only be introduced when 4 Super Street Fighter 2 cabinets were connected together. The home ports, on the other hand, featured the tournament mode regardless, which, as you might guess, was also another innovative feature for a console fighter. Coming up next, what follows is what many people consider not only the definitive version of Street Fighter 2, but also the greatest competitive fighting game ever made. Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Released in 1994, this was Capcom's final arcade update of Street Fighter 2 and included everything that made Street Fighter 2 as good as it was since its debut in 1991. This is the game that is still played in fighting game tournaments to this day, making it the oldest fighting game still played competitively at tournaments around the world. Super Turbo adds a brand new feature known as Super Meter / Gauge, along with new moves and animations for all the returning characters. Super Turbo also has 4 gameplay speed settings and introduces a new secret character who would eventually become an iconic mainstay, Akuma. In the arcade ports, there's a secret code to playing as Akuma. On the character select screen, highlight Ryu, wait 3 seconds, then highlight T-Hawk, Guile, Cammy, and Ryu, waiting 3 seconds between each selection. Highlight any character, preferably Ryu, then press start and hit all 3 punch buttons simultaneously. This cheat code is so famous, it's right up there with the Konami code. The Super Meter allows fighters to unleash powerful super combos when the gauge is full. The gauge gradually increases as the player performs and connects with special moves and attacks. This gameplay element adds significant replay value and is also groundbreaking for 1994. This forces players to save and strategically use their super move to turn the tide of battle. For 1994, the graphics are a bit dated compared to other fighting games out at the time, but Super Turbo has stood the test of time. Super Turbo has been re-released countless times as Hyper Street Fighter 2 as part of the Street Fighter 15th Anniversary Collection, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, Ultra Street Fighter 2 for the Nintendo Switch, and more recently as part of the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection. While some fighting game fans would deem Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo as old or rehashed at the time of its release, this game made the point that Street Fighter 2 is a timeless classic. There's a reason why we are still playing it more than 20 years later. Feel free to have your own opinions, but I do see why many would consider Street Fighter II the greatest and most important fighting game of all time. That is the end of this review. So if you guys enjoyed it, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button and leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. And be sure to share your thoughts on this game in the comments below. And I will see you guys in another review. This is Shiz Oh Network signing off.